Hi everyone, first video for day 4, the last for this week. So we had the sum formulas. We can use a sum formula in some creative way to derive important results. For example, if I set x and y to be x, meaning I just take sine of x plus x, this formula says it's sine x cosine x plus cosine x sine x, which is 2 sine x cosine x, which means that I get this relation, which is called a double angle formula. What does that mean? That means that if I have values for sine of x, I can find the value for sine of 2x. So like if I know sine of 10 degrees, I can find sine of 20 degrees. Show that this is true. Well, just apply it to the result. This is cosine A cosine B minus sine A sine B, which is cosine squared minus sine squared. Now how do you get these two forms? Is remember 1 minus cosine squared is sine squared. Equivalently, 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. Right? So if I replace cosine squared by 1 minus sine squared, I get 1 minus sine squared minus sine squared, which gives me 1 minus 2 sine squared. Similarly, if I replace sine squared by 1 minus cosine squared, I get cosine squared minus 1 plus cosine squared, which gives me 2 cosine squared x minus 1. So while sine 2x has only one form, cosine 2x has, this is the original form, and then in terms of just sine is 1 minus 2 sine squared, and in terms of just cosine is 2 cosine squared x minus 1. Similarly, if you plug into the formula for tan of x plus y or tan of a plus b, you get this result. Let's look at an example. Cosine x is negative 2/3 and x is in quadrant 2. So let's just check. ASTC, sine positive, so makes sense that cosine would be negative. Find cosine 2x and sine 2x. Now first, if cosine x is negative 2/3, and the negative is because of the quadrant, which means in terms of the triangle, this is adjacent hypotenuse and root 5. So sine x is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay. So based on our formula for sine 2x, this would be 2 times root 5/3 times 2/3, which is 4 root 5/9. However, I have not put the sign here as in the plus or minus. So let's think about it a little bit. If you have an angle in quadrant 2, if you twice that angle, what quadrant would you be in? So pick one. So let's say 110 degree is quadrant 2, and then if you double it, 220, which is in quadrant 3. So you end up here. But what about 150 degrees? 150 degrees is in quadrant 2. You double it, 300 degrees, which is in quadrant 4. Right? So, sorry. So if x is in, so x in quadrant 2 means 2x can be in quadrant 3 or quadrant 4, which is kind of a problem because it's not the same quadrant, right? But sine, if you look at sine, in both of these quadrants, sine is negative. So this should be negative. But when you find the values for cosine, right, it can be positive or negative depending on which quadrant it is in. Next one says write cosine 3x in terms of cosine x. So we can use our sum again, x plus 2x, and this time we are going to use the fact that we have an expression for cosine 2x, right? Sine x, sine 2x. Let's use the one with cosine x. So this is 2 cosine squared x minus 1 minus sine x, 2 sine x, cosine x. We're trying to reduce everything into cosine x. So this is 2 cosine cubed x minus cosine x minus 2 cosine x. Sine squared x can be written as 1 minus cosine squared x. So 2 cosine cubed x minus cosine x distribute minus 2 cosine x plus 2 cosine cubed x. So what you get here is 2 plus 2, 4 cosine cubed x minus 3 cosine x. This is also called a triple angle formula, right? Meaning if you know cosine of 20 degrees, you can find cosine of 60 degrees. So here's it. If we know value of sine 10, we can find sine 20, 40, 80, etc. so on. So the natural next question to ask is, what if we half the angle? Is there a relation between sine x and sine x over 2? Or between, meaning, if I know sine 10, can I find sine of 5? Another way to think about this half relationship, in order to ignore the fraction or not work with fraction, is to say, if I know sine 2x, can I find sine x? Yeah, because the relationship then between 2x and x is the same as the relationship between x and x over 2. Here's how you can do it. Recall the double angle formula for cosine. If you solve for sine, right, then you get that 2 sine squared x equals 1 minus cosine 2x. Consequently, sine squared is 1 minus cosine 2x over 2. So this gives a half angle formula. In the same vein here, to write cosine squared, use the other one, right? So how you would do that is use cosine 2x is 2 cosine squared x minus 1. So cosine squared x is cosine 2x plus 1 over 2. And therefore, what's tan squared x? Tan squared x is sine squared x over cosine squared x, which is 1 minus cosine 2x over 2 divided by 1 plus cosine 2x over 2, which if you simplify, the 2's cancel out and you get this ratio. Here's an application. Express sine squared, cosine squared in terms of first powers of cosine. Now these are not first powers, right? These are squares. So what we are going to do is, we're going to replace sine squared by what we just wrote. It was 1 minus cosine 2x over 2. And this is 1 plus cosine 2x over 2. Now, having the argument as 2x is fine because the goal is to reduce it to first power. So this is just going to be 4, 1 minus cosine 2x and 1 plus cosine 2x. Now I'm not going to multiply them because multiplying would create a square term. Yes. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. Find the value of sine 22.5 degrees. Let's say I know sine of 45 degrees is 1 over root 2. Now one way to do this, is again use this relation. Sine squared x is 1 minus cosine 2x over 2. Cosine 45 is 1 over root 2. So if 2x is 45, x is 22.5. Right? So sine squared 22.5 is 1 minus cosine 45 over 2. 1 minus 1 over root 2 over 2. You take the square root, it's going to give you sine 22.5. So it's just making observations like 22.5 is half of 45, or just as we had before, where 75 is a sum of 30 and 45. It says find tan of u over 2 if sine of u is 2/5 and u is in quadrant 2. Again, ASTC, so it's positive. So remember, or recall, tan squared x is 1 minus cosine 2x over 1 plus cosine 2x. Let's say I let 2x equal u, then x equals u over 2. So that gives me tan squared u over 2 is 1 minus cosine u over 1 plus cosine u. But I have my triangle, which gives me sine is this, and this is root 21. So this is 1 minus cosine u is root 21 over 5, 1 plus root 21 over 5. That's 5 minus root 21 over 5 times 5 over 5 plus root 21. These cancel out. But that is tan squared, right? So tan is going to be the square root of 5 minus root 21, 5 plus root 21. Positive or negative? So if u is in quadrant 2, it's less than 180. So half of that is going to be less than 90. So u quadrant 2 means u over 2 quadrant 1. Quadrant 1, everything is positive. So tan u over 2 is also going to be positive. That's the end of this first video. There's going to be one last video where once again we just rearrange some of the identities to get a different kind of relationship.